You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change. Now the last episode I was talking about communication essentially in business and the relevant components of that, especially when it comes to building teams. And I want to expand this a little bit further in the sense that in order to do this effectively in organizations, that is, in order to build a good culture where there are strong relationships and where people really work towards strong sense of values, we got to understand what leadership and what management is really about. Now, why am I so insistent on this? Well, because just like with individuals, organizations can be either healthy or unhealthy. And so we can actually, in essence, really pinpoint what the relevant variables are that can distinguish one from the other. In other words, what makes up a healthy organization and what makes one unhealthy. And so the things that, as someone who's worked in, for example, organizations, that I tend to look for is, what's the culture like? Is there, a strong sense of job satisfaction? What's the morale like? What's the staff turnover like? What are the key driving principles within the organisation? Is there a lot of absenteeism within the organisation? If so, where are the hot spots? So there are a number of factors that I, as a leader in an organisation and as a manager in an organisation, can fundamentally look at that's going to give me, in essence, a health check. And that includes, as I said in the last episode, a sense of well-being, organizational well-being. Okay? So, according to Patrick Lencioni, we're looking at the capacity of teams being trusting, to be able to deal with conflict effectively, to be able to have a commitment to each other and the tasks at hand. And is there accountability, and are we paying attention to results? There's a whole range of things that I think are really highly relevant. Okay, so let me talk about what do I mean what's the difference between leadership and management. And in my book, there are two important concepts in the field of organizational behavior. And a lot of people actually use them interchangeably, which I'm not comfortable with, because they fundamentally represent different approaches to achieving goals within an organization. And I want to highlight what those differences are. So let me talk initially about focus. And that is, leadership focuses on inspiring and motivating people to achieve a shared vision. Okay, so when I've talked about the executive leadership cycle, one of the things that I'm looking at in this first sphere is this whole notion of values, relationships, and communication. To me, they are fundamentally one of the first cabs off the rank if I talk about focus. So what's then the next level? Well, the next level is also at a leadership level where I talk about looking at the culture and the values in that culture and the behaviors in that culture. So if we're looking at focus and leadership and management, what's my management focus? Well, at this particular level of focus, I'm looking at planning, organizing, and controlling resources to accomplish very specific tasks. Okay, so that's the next level. So let's talk a little bit about goals. If I purely focus myself on the leadership level, what I'm talking about here is leadership is primarily concerned with setting direction, aligning people, and mobilizing resources to achieve a vision or mission, whereas management is primarily concerned with achieving goals efficiently and effectively. So a lot of that obviously sounds very much like an operational aspect. So, I could even talk about, what's my strategy? What are my tactics? What are my, production issues going to be? So, as always, goals need to be talked about in terms of being, smart. Are they specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and time frame? And the relationship between leadership and management is to get the balance right. So leadership needs to be able to work with their management to get the cascading effect, as Patrick Lencioni talks about, through the organisation to drive up, sticking and coming up with the results that we want. And that's not necessarily easy. That often means a whole bunch of stuff can get in the way, can go wrong. And as we've seen in the last few years, organisations have been very, very much challenged by the problem of COVID, the supply chain, issues like inflation and so on. So this is an intricate dance that we're engaging in. So the third issue that I want to identify is that of style, okay? So leadership involves setting an example, being an influencer, inspiring others to follow. Whereas in management, we're much more directive and controlling in nature, frequently relying on supervision and delegation. Now, it's at this point that things can go really pear-shaped, because a lot of this now starts to draw on individual personalities. Many, especially in today's organisations, many leaders are there through being charismatic, being well-spoken, being persuasive. And the interesting thing is that a lot of people who have those characteristics in buckets are actually narcissistic and in some cases psychopaths. And I'm not saying that everyone in leadership is like that, but we know from research that the current economic ideologies and the cultural values that we have gives that type of personality, the narcissistic personality or the psychopath, the corporate psychopath, an accelerated upward mobility. So they often rise to the top very, very quickly because they're good at spinning a story, whether it's true or not, almost becomes irrelevant in a way. And so they can be extraordinarily inspirational. They'll bring people to the fold. But the question is, do they walk the talk? And in a lot of instances, that level of confidence from leaders is more about attitude rather than competence. And, some people refer to the difference there between competence and attitude, one of evidence. And, I think we need to keep that in mind in a lot of ways is, has someone got the runs on the board? So when we come to management style, right, we know from the research that we've got fundamentally, like in parenting, three management styles. We've got the authoritarian, the laissez-faire manager, and the one that we really want to optimize on is the authoritative manager. Okay, and so the two extremes, like the laissez-faire and the authoritarian, have massive drawbacks. They usually, are the ones where we start seeing the well-being of the collective organisation begin to drop on those things that I talked about earlier on, i.e., job satisfaction, morale, staff turnover, absenteeism. Those variables will pop up really, really, really strongly. The other problem that I see that is often personality driven in management is the micromanager, the person who, simply can't help themselves but to get in the way of the employee from doing their job. And it's really, really sad because, the reality is that if we allow most people to just get on with a job within the context of the team, I don't need to micromanage them. I just need to check in with them, make sure that they've got what they need to do the job, to build the resources around them. And then we'll just wait to see as to how the results go. Most of the time, a lot of managers simply get in the way of success because of their own unmet psychological needs, whatever they may be. And I'm not going to get into those right here and now. The other problem is that some managers don't delegate well, partly because, and this is an important issue when we talk about organisational behaviour, they rely on position power rather than a sense of empowerment. Position empowerment is the sort of hierarchical stuff, the dominance hierarchy. And in many organisations, in fact, I'd argue in all organisations, if there's an emphasis on position power as a dominance hierarchy, we're not looking at a very healthy organisation. In fact, we're looking at something that's quite ill and often gets itself into intensive care and possibly needs to be euthanized. All right, what's the other issue here that we want to talk about? Innovation. Leaders are more focused on innovation and creativity, while managers tend to orientate themselves to maintaining the status quo. Now, this is where I start to go, well, hang on a minute. Even as a manager, I'm going to need to have sufficient awareness to allow myself to be flexible, to adapt to the change in conditions within the organisation due to the demands and expectations from outside as well as inside, so that we can adapt, that we can be resilient. It's all very well having, an innovative frame of mind and, creativity, boiling over. But unless leadership and management work together to again create that lovely rhythm, that harmonizing, and we're not going to get the results that we want. We need to be able to move this through on that level. Innovation is, a lot of times, what's that old saying? 20% inspiration, 80% perspiration. Well, that's about the ratio that we're going to see at this level. Okay, the other one is time frame. As I said, leadership is very much focused strategically, which is a more long-term oriented perspective, whereas management is more short-term oriented. But again, I'm going to challenge that in some ways because I'm going to say they're reflexive. They need to bounce off each other. Unfortunately, in current corporate climates, leadership tends to look at long-term as being to the next financial year. And my belief is that that's insufficient. If I'm leading a corporation, a company, a business, I want to look 3 to 5 years down the track, 10 years, 15 years. How long can I actually make this organisation that consists of communities of people as sustainable as possible in the right way? So timeframes are important. We need to negotiate those. We need to take a look at what's going on. And the longer the time frame, the more sensitive we need to be to, take into account, to be aware of the changes in the marketplace, but also within the organisation, the changes that are occurring there. And the last one, but not the least, in fact, in my argument, it's one of the most important one is focusing on people. Leaders are more people focused, or are they? This is the tricky bit. A lot of people in management will go, well, no, we're task focused. My argument is that leadership can have the, privilege to be much, much more people focused, to be culture focused, to be values focused, to be engaged with a vision. But I argue that managers are as responsible for the people focus as much as they are task focused. We are not going to get people to perform well if their emotional, psychological needs aren't being sustained. That is just absolutely fundamentally critical. And so between, the last episode and this episode, it's a way of bringing this together into not just a framework, but actually a process that allows us to establish healthy, successful organizations. And what's more important is that the people who participate in these organizations will reflect that health and dynamism and creativity. We can't operate, and I think that political systems like, the Soviet Union has shown very clearly historically that people stagnate in those systems. The only problem is that corporatism is almost as dangerous in its own way of killing people off, but mostly because of neglect. We're not, there's this big issue at the moment. Are we valuing people enough? Well, when most of your corporate kitty goes into remunerating the CEO and the other C-level, but marginalizes, the rest of the organization, the rest of the employees, we don't have a healthy organization. It's not going to be a sustainable organization. And in fact, it's not one that is either inclusive or, distributive. It's all based on the dominance hierarchy and fundamentally the use and abuse of those human resources. And you've already heard me be very critical of that term, and I'm going to always be critical of that term, because we're not looking at this as a systems approach. We're looking at it as an individualistic thing, and it's therefore that pointy hierarchy wherein those on the top take up most of the space at the cost of the others. All right, here's some food for thought. If you're a leader, where are you leaning? If you're a manager, where are you leaning? Think about these issues. It's how can I be the best person possible so that I can encourage others to, step up into that, illuminated, vision that brings health and well-being to the workplace. Because let's face it, most of us spend more time at work than we spend with our partners and families. So surely this requires some thought and certainly some change. Until next time, this is me signing off, and think about this deeply.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit makinggoodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.